Hello everyone and welcome to Cine 103 Class 12 Screwball Comedy. Oh boy, one of my favorite topics. I love a good comedy, and the comedies of the 30s and 40s were just fantastic. So let's get to it. Screwball comedy, 1930s and 1940s. They still make screwball type comedies today, but they are really identified with the 1930s and 1940s. Just like film noir, I think. You could still make kind of film noir, neo-noir, they might call it, today with movies, you know, even in the 1970s, Chinatown, things like that, Sin City. And screwball comedy, too, is still being made, but classic screwball comedy is in this 20-year period. And it is almost always romantic. I can't think of a screwball comedy that doesn't have some kind of romance in it. Very witty, verbal, right? Rapid fire dialogue, and it's often mixed with broad, physical, and screwball type comedy. There might be a leopard we're going to see in Bringing Up Baby, chases, falls, things like that, but not exactly Marx Brothers stuff, not exactly Laurel and Hardy or anything like that. Not quite that physical or slapsticky or anything like that. This is a little bit more sophisticated. You're probably going to see people maybe even in tuxedos and things like that. Screwball comedy loves to make fun of rich people in any event. So it's a little bit different and really kind of its time, of the Depression era and of the World War II era. And here we see a classic purveyor of screwball comedy. That's Preston Sturges right there. And he is overseeing a scene from his classic, from one of his classic films. And so let's dive in. This would probably be Sullivan's Travels. I'm pretty sure this is Sullivan's Travels. And so he was the writer and director, really the king of screwball comedy. He put out a string of films in just 5 or 6 years. Boy, just like a comet, just sort of shot to the top. And after this 5-6 year period was over, he kind of was done. But he left behind this rich body of work. Oh, it's just so fantastic. And there he is in the center with some people from The Palm Beach Story, another one of his great films. And he used a lot of people over and over again. We'll see some of his stock troupe of actors. Let's take a look at his films. There we go. The Great McGinty is going to take on politics. The Lady Eve is going to take on romance. Sullivan's Travels, Hollywood, The Palm Beach Story. He's going to take on business. So he's really making fun of a lot of sacred cows. He's smart enough to not try to take on religion. That probably would have been a losing proposition back in the 1940s, and he was wise enough not to do that. But pretty much everything else that was hold near and dear to Americans back then. And especially, he took on patriotism and the military and all of that. And that is pretty surprising, I have to say. You know, during wartime, most people treat the military and the effort and hero worship and all that as pretty sacred stuff. And he took them all on, and not exactly sure how he got away with that. Let's look at a little bit more. Motherhood. He took on motherhood too. Boy, you wonder how could somebody do that, but yeah, he sure did. And politics, sure, that's easy. That's easy in Hollywood. But some of the other stuff, boy, you kind of wonder how he thought he could get away with it. We're going to start off with Sullivan's Travels, and Sullivan, he wants to make a socially conscious film called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And here's a group of his stock characters here. We're going to see these these guys in film after film, clip after clip, and they're not really the stars. Joel McCrea starred in 2 films, but William Demarest was in like 5 or 6 of them, and a lot of these guys were in a whole bunch of his films. So he wants to make fun, or I'm sorry, Sullivan wants to make a socially conscious film, maybe along the lines of something Frank Capra might have done, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Sometimes I think even of Grapes of Wrath, one of these wonderful, dramatic, heart-stirring kind of efforts. But Preston Sturges is going to make fun of all of that. Now, a lot of people think that since the great Preston Sturges said that really the peak of what you can do, that one of the best things you can do is bring a little joy and a little happiness to people, especially during times of depression or maybe war or something like that. But Preston Sturges had a little bit more on his mind than that. He wasn't just saying go out and make big, stupid movies that are entertaining. He had something on his mind. And I think a lot of people today say, oh, well, I'm going to make a Transformers movie, and yeah, it's a big, dumb, stupid movie, but what the heck? It's bringing a little fun and joy and into people's lives. And Preston Sturges was really a bit more subversive than that. He had a little bit more on his mind than that. He's kind of letting Sullivan think that that's the only thing that's going on here. But while he's doing that in Sullivan's Travels, he's got a lot more to say about the Depression and about the prison system and marriage and a lot of other stuff too. So it's not just a big, dumb, stupid comedy. He really does have a lot of other stuff on his mind that I think a lot of people, when they quote Preston Sturges, they're kind of missing the deeper point. Okay, so maybe you've heard of this title, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And that's because in the year 2000, the Coen brothers reimagined it. And they are fans of movies and movie history and all of that. And this is set in the 1930s. And we have some 3 people escaping from a chain gang working in a prison. And they are out busting rocks in the hot sun. And they decide to take off. And so the Coen brothers are kind of making the movie that maybe Preston Sturges might have made, or the movie that Sullivan might have made. We don't know. But people that know film history, when the Coen brothers announced that the title of their movie would be Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, they knew that it was kind of an inside joke. So I've linked to the trailer, and you'll see that it is really a lot of fun. And if you want to, you can watch it. There are a couple of Coen Brothers movies in our class. Hail Caesar's another one that you can watch for extra credit, not for full credit, because they're a little bit out of our timeline. We really need movies that came out before 1945. But anyway, check out Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And think about maybe an extra credit film. So in one of the very opening scenes, where Sully is talking to his studio chiefs about making this socially conscious film, and they keep saying, but with a little sex, but with a little sex. And he decides that he wants to dress up as a homeless person, a tramp, as they were called back then. And he goes down to wardrobe. He goes down to the wardrobe department of the studio and puts on all these raggedy clothes and all of that. And his butler, Eric Blore, and we met him already in Top Hat, the Fred Astaire film. And he says, I took the extreme liberty of sewing your studio ID into the sole of your shoe. And it goes by really fast, and it's real easy to miss. But it is going to have kind of a big role in the film. And that sometimes is called Chekhov's gun. And Anton Chekhov, I think, was a playwright, and that was part of his, I don't know if I could call it strategy, but I guess he came up with the idea or the theory that if in a play someone has a gun or brandishes a gun or talks about a gun at the beginning in the first act, that it's going to have to get used by the third act. You can't just say, oh, look what I've got here, and not comment on it or not use it, right? Yeah, here's a gun, and we don't hear about the gun throughout most of the play, but yeah, it's a gun. It's going to have to come back out and get used. Okay, now Studio ID in the sole of your shoe is not exactly a gun, but it is one of those things. It's not exactly foreshadowing. I have a lot of students that think of foreshadowing. It's not really quite foreshadowing. Chekhov's gun is kind of one of the best ways to describe it. And we've got another Chekhov's gun coming up in a couple of films, so we're going to be on the lookout for that as well. So there we go. If a gun is introduced in the first act, must be used by the third act. Chekhov's gun. And that is Eric Blore, character actor, and our butler from Top Hat. And always plays like a very proper English butler. And so this is the second time we've seen Eric Blore. So this would be a good time to go and dive into Sullivan's Travels. The wonderful opening scene, it is just so hilarious. He keeps talking about wanting to make socially conscious, and that illuminates the spirit of the common man, and one of the studio executives keeps saying, but with a little sex. And then we have to do this, and illuminations and so on, but with a little sex. So yeah, he's surely having a little bit of fun with Hollywood types. And they're in order, so normally I would be showing about the first, 15 minutes or so. He has made up his mind. He's going to put on all these raggedy clothes, and they are going to follow him along with a big, giant, I don't think they called them RVs back then, but he's got an outfitted RV that is going to follow just to make sure he's okay, and he's going to go on the road with a bindle of his clothes tied to a stick over his shoulder, and off he goes and gets a ride with the young kid, and so on. Then he's going to have a few more adventures, but eventually he's going to head out, do some hitchhiking, and he's going to get dropped off right back in Hollywood again. He's going to go into a diner and meet the girl, and she's played by Veronica Lake, big star in the 1940s and 1950s. She was known for her peekaboo hairstyle. The hair would sort of come across one of her eyes, and it was beautiful and blonde and gorgeous. And during World War II, lots of young women wanted to copy that style. But unfortunately, a lot of those young women were working in factories, and the factory people and the government and the studios decided that maybe young women shouldn't be having this long hair that could sort of get all over your eyes and all that, especially if you're working in a factory. So Veronica Lake had to go and make some public service announcements about the war effort and proper use of hair and all that. It's really kind of funny. In the movie, she really looks just gorgeous with Joel McCrea, and so she is going to think that he's a poor guy and try and buy him a cup of coffee and all that kind of stuff. And then after she sees his beautiful mansion, she's going to decide, mostly because it's a movie, she's going to decide to go out on the road with him. He needs to see what the real world is like. He's been rich and spoiled and went to private school and all that all his life. And so she's going to tuck up all her hair. She's not going to cut it off, of course, but she's going to tuck up her hair under a hat and go out as a young boy and go on the road. And Sully is going to really, see the real world. He's going to see what they used to call a hobo jungle, and that would be just a homeless encampment. Today we'd call it maybe a homeless encampment. Sometimes they used to call them Hoovervilles, and that's interesting because the president, Herbert Hoover, was president during the first couple of years of the Depression. He really thought that the country and business could right itself and didn't want the government to get too involved. And so a lot of people called these homeless encampments derogatorily Hoovervilles. And another part of the Depression, even though this movie was made in the 1940s, it's definitely referencing the Depression era. Lots of people would ride the rails. Young people would ride the rails. The interstate highways weren't really around much if you're trying to get a great distance. Most people didn't really drive cars hundreds and hundreds of miles or anything like that. Not like today if you were actually hitchhiking, which isn't really a thing much anymore. But if you were really trying to get across country, the trains were the best way to do it. And without a ticket, basically, mostly young men, I would imagine women too, but when the train is pulling out of the rail yards before it gets going too fast, that's when you would jump on and try to find an empty car, a box car. You'd be lucky if maybe there was some straw or something in there, and you could ride the rails. Now, the railroads weren't very happy about that. They had men with like baseball bats clubbing people, you know, get off the train. You can't, nobody rides for free or anything like that. So it was kind of dangerous. You don't know what kind of people would be on the trains and so on. And then as the train is slowing down and pulling into the next train station, you'd have to jump off before it came to a full stop, because that's, once you're in the rail yard, that's where the railroad security would come looking for people riding for free. So we're going to see a little bit of riding the rails in this, and in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, they are riding the rails, and it was kind of a thing. And then also the homeless encampments would tend to be near railroads. Just like today, it might be near highways or freeways or something like that. Back then, these hobo jungles or Hoovervilles would be near the trains and train tracks and all that sort of thing. And Sully is going to see one of those and walk through. And the movie gets kind of serious there for a little while. And Sully is going to decide that he's going to go get some money, go back home, get some money, and hand out dollar bills, which would probably be like $20, $30 worth today, so that people can maybe buy something, a little bit of food, something like that. And one person, one denizen of the encampment, thinks this guy's got a lot of money. Maybe I can get all of the money. So he is going to take it from him forcefully and take his clothes and so on, and his shoes with his studio ID in the sole of the shoes. He's going to get chased by Sully. He's going to get hit by a train, and Sully is going to go to real prison for murder, for killing Sullivan, basically, right? Because the other guy's the one that had the ID in his shoes, and he's so mangled up by the train that his face doesn't register with anybody. So our Sully now, instead of pretending to be down on his luck and poor and all that, is actually going to be on a chain gang, and nobody is going to know who he is. Of course, everybody in prison is going to say, I'm innocent. Okay, so they just laugh at him when he say, it's a mistaken identity, I'm innocent. And finally, he's going to get an idea how to get out. And when he gets back to the studio, he's going to surprise everyone. I'm sorry I'm giving so much away, but it's such a wonderful movie. And in case you don't watch it all, but I have linked to the very ending scene. Now that he really has seen the dark side of the world, and now that he really has the experience to make a movie about the poor and the downtrodden, he decides he doesn't want to do that at all. While he was in prison, they got to see a cartoon at an African-American church where they let the prisoners in once a week to watch movies, and everybody's going to be laughing, and he's going to learn the lesson that comedy lightens the spirit in hard times. And he decides that what he does is a very noble effort to go out and make comedies. And for maybe people are in prison, maybe they're just down on their luck, but he decides that comedy has a great worth. And the studio heads are going to be dumbfounded that now that he really has the bona fides to go out there and make a dramatic movie, he decides he doesn't want to make a dramatic movie. So anyway, we would usually watch a lot of that in class. That's kind of the one we would really hone in on, Sullivan's Travels. There's lots of other fantastic stuff from Preston Sturges, and we would watch shorter scenes. So we've got Eddie Bracken, and he is our 4F anti-hero. We're still with Preston Sturges, and Eddie Bracken is 4F is physically unfit. And so in 2 movies, Miracle of Morgan's Creek and Harold the Conquering Hero, Eddie is going to be the guy that wants to get into the military. He wants to sign up. He wants to volunteer. And during World War II, really the day after the bombing at Pearl Harbor, there were just lines around the block of everybody deciding, all the patriotic young men deciding we have to go off and defend our country against the Japanese and against the Nazis. And it was really kind of shameful to not be in uniform during the war years. And if you saw the Captain America Marvel movies, and we see scrawny little Steve Rogers, and he keeps trying to join up and get in to the military. That's really how it was. That's really how it was. There were people that were not quite right, maybe too small, maybe their eyesight was bad, and physically, maybe diabetes, who knows what. But if you were somewhere between 17 and 40, you really wanted to be in uniform. It was, or at least 17 and 30 or 35. You really wanted to be in uniform. It was really kind of embarrassing to not be in uniform. That part of it they really got right. And so Preston Sturges is kind of playing on that, all this overabundance of patriotism and so on. And he noticed that men were, getting out of the military and going home and having parades and a hero's welcome. And he noticed in a lot of cases, men were getting this wonderful hero's welcome that had never even been in combat. They just were back from the war. And he thought that maybe patriotism and small-town parades and all of that, small-town boosterism was maybe a little out of hand. So he's going to have a little bit of fun with Hail the Conquering Hero, and I've linked to a couple of scenes with that. He has chronic hay fever, which I don't think is a real thing. I think that's why he picked it. He has chronic hay fever, and so he is going back home. He meets a bunch of Marines who say to him, you should have written your mother. You got to go back, and just here's some awards and some medals and stuff like that, and go home, kiss your mother, take your uniform, put it in mothballs, and nobody's the wiser. She'll be proud of you, and that'll be that. But what he doesn't know is one of the Marines is called ahead. There's going to be a big parade. The entire town is out with marching bands and all that sort of thing, and speeches and everything. And our poor guy there, Eddie Bracken, is now he's kind of stuck. And he's told his girlfriend, there she is, he's told his girlfriend that he found somebody else while he was overseas, and don't wait for me to come back. And of course he loves her and never should have written that letter. So now we have this whole thing. How's he going to get out of this big mess with the whole town? And now he's kind of he's a liar and a fake. It's so embarrassing. It's even worse than if he had just gotten back with hay fever. Okay, so our other story, our other Eddie Bracken story, is The Miracle of Morgan's Creek. And how they made that movie is even more of a miracle. So here's the setup. Again, here's the setup, and I've linked to a couple of scenes. Our, not this girl here, but another girl, and Eddie. Eddie also is still 4F. Different movie, different name, but it's a small town. He's still 4F. And she is very patriotic. She goes to the cantina where they entertain the troops, and she drinks too much, and she parties too hard, and when she and passes out. And when she comes to the next morning, she has what may or may not be a wedding ring on her finger. It's just a shower curtain ring, and her name is in the wedding registry at the Justice of the Peace. The name of her husband is, I don't know if it's X or illegible or what, but she's pretty sure she's married, and as it turns out, she's pregnant. And in the 1940s, unwed mothers were really looked down upon. It was pretty shameful the way women were treated back then if a guy would run off. And so she's an unwed mother, and she's pretty sure she's married, or at least she sure hopes she's married. Now, here comes the big twist. She is pregnant with 6 babies, which is the title hero. And the implication is that there were 6 soldiers with her. Okay, that there were 6 different fathers, husbands, I don't know what. That's the implication. And our 4F Eddie decides that he's going to marry her and make an honest woman out of her. So this is so interesting on so many levels. First off, it tells us about morality in the 1940s, and this 4F guy and wanting to do the right thing and all of that. In both of these movies, William Demarest plays the girl's father. So he plays the father, or no, he plays a Marine in one movie and the father in the other movie. And so that's one of the things I really like about movies, that when we go back these 50, 60, 70 years, this is history. This is American history. This is the way people acted. Okay, it's the way Hollywood sort of thought people acted, or maybe should act, or whatever, but they really do reflect society. Just like movies of today, only today we're so close to the movies, it's really hard to tell what they're reflecting. But if we go back these 30, 40, 50 years, and we can see how, what kind of language people used, we can see how women were treated, unmarried women were treated, we can see how minorities were treated, and it's all reflected in the movies. It really is. It's a history. A lot of these, it's a history of the world, but a lot of them, it's a history of America, especially the screwball comedies of the 1940s. So sometimes when they say something kind of weird or kind of icky or kind of, you're not sure, that's history for you, right? That's history. Okay, so one other film that I usually like to show. Let me see, where did it go? No, we saw that one. There we go. Okay, there we go. Sorry. The Lady Eve. And he's going to make fun of romance. And there's a wonderful scene I've linked to. And we have Barbara Stanwyck. And Barbara Stanwyck, we're going to meet her in our next class. She is going to play one of the great femme fatales in movies, and we're going to see her in Double Indemnity. And also in The Lady Eve, we see Henry Fonda, and we have seen Henry Fonda almost at the complete opposite end of the social spectrum. Here in The Lady Eve, he's very, very rich, wealthy, inheriting, I don't know, lots and lots of money from his family. And we saw him previously in The Grapes of Wrath as Tom Joad from the Oklahoma family, the Okies, who the Dust Bowl has more or less forced out and off their farm, and he's off to California. So one of them he's playing the poorest of the poor, and in the other he's playing the richest of the rich. he does a great job at both. So, yeah, check out The Lady Eve as well. And Preston Sturges' take on romance. And we get to see two of our classic 1940s actors and actresses playing very interesting parts, femme fatales, and that sort of thing. Okay, where are we? Let's see. So, Preston Sturges had a stock company. Many actors appear in multiple roles, and that's William Demarest. He's in most of them. All right, so check out the Preston Sturges stuff, and come on back. All right, come on back to this. Mark your place, and we've got a different director here. We have Bringing Up Baby, and our director is Howard Hawks, and two of our great Hollywood stars of this era, Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. And we've talked about them a little bit in our documentary, Movie Stars and Moguls. Cary Grant could do drama and comedy. Very nice looking guy, tall, handsome, hair, all that. Wonderful, wonderful actor. Classic leading man. Hitchcock used him in a couple of great movies. He worked with all the great directors in Hollywood, or many of the great directors in Hollywood, and a classic leading man. Here it's a comedy. I love Cary Grant comedies, I think, better than his dramas, but he does a pretty good drama as well. And this is Katharine Hepburn, and also one of the top actresses. She has the record for most Oscar wins at 4, well regarded in the industry. She won her last one in the 1980s, I think in the 1980s. First one was in the 30s, and her fourth one was in the maybe late 70s or early 80s. And she was equally adept at comedy and drama. And Bringing Up Baby, that's Baby right there. Baby is a... And again, this is one of the classic screwball comedies. I can't believe how fast Katharine Hepburn can talk. You might have to stop and rewatch some scenes. It can go so fast, and it is so much fun. Howard Hawks was very versatile. That's the key word here, versatile. And he could do westerns and screwball comedies, film noir. We're going to see a film noir of his in our next class. Action adventure. He could do period epics with chariots and things like that. War movies, a racing movie, a musical. He worked with Marilyn Monroe. We've already seen his Public Enemy. So a little of this and a little of that. He was really a fantastic, or not Public Enemy, I'm sorry, Scarface. Really a wonderful director. And he doesn't quite get the acclaim that Alfred Hitchcock and some of the others do, because he didn't have a genre that he sort of stuck with. I think if you're somebody like Alfred Hitchcock, and you do lots of suspenseful movies, or if you're like John Ford and you do lots of maybe westerns, that it's easier for the public to kind of get to know you and figure out who you are. Whereas directors like Howard Hawks, who so versatile, and we have directors like that today. A lot of people know Tarantino because he's sort of stuck to his style. But there are directors like Danny Boyle and people like that who could do sci-fi, they can do drama, they can do comedy, and we don't always know them quite so well. Anyway, there we go. Howard Hawks, Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn. And by the way, Katharine Hepburn wearing slacks, kind of rare in the 1940s. Some made a deal out of it. She... not that there's anything wrong with it, but she was straight. She wasn't a lesbian or anything like that. But the way gossip columnists and things like that latch on to just anything, women wearing pants. Oh, she must be a lesbian, and that's really sad. But it does speak to the way history was back then. Okay, speaking of history, Bringing Up Baby. There's a couple of things. And at the very opening scene of the movie, which I've linked to, we have a few things here. First off, um, we have this wonderful dinosaur that they made for the movie. And this is a comedy. And he's looking for the intercostal clavicle, if I remember right, for this dinosaur. And it's a bone, and we have a baby, which is a leopard, and bones and animals and all that kind of stuff. And so we have this big, giant dinosaur, and it's a comedy. And I have to ask you, what do you think is going to have to happen to this dinosaur skeleton before the movie's over? And yes, the whole thing's going to have to come down, of course. Of course. That's just the way movies are. It's a kind of a Chekhov's gun. We see it in the very first scene of the movie. We don't see it again until the very last scene of the movie. But yeah, for sure, that whole thing's going to have to come down. This is a romantic comedy, and we have wonderful tropes. We have the opposites attract. She's a little crazy and a little screwball, really, and she talks fast and has very low inhibitions or anything like that. And Cary Grant's character is the classic professor, or the absent-minded professor. The only thing on his mind really is the intercostal clavicle and all of that. He's not thinking about money, and he's not thinking about women or anything like that. He's the classic absent-minded professor, buttoned down, they might say. And of course, the opposites attract. Now, he's supposed to get married to another woman, and her hair is, she's also a scientist, and her hair is slickered back. She almost looks sort of mannish, you might say. And she is saying that your work will be our baby, and we don't need a honeymoon. And they sort of imply, you mean none of that stuff, right? And she says, no, this will be our, our life's work and all that. And she's clearly the dominant force, or would be the dominant one in their marriage. That's for sure. The other thing, speaking of, in screwball comedies, and I mentioned earlier about horror and how women often needed to get rescued. That's just the way it was in Dracula's and Frankenstein and The Mummy and so on. But in screwball comedy, the women are really dominant. They're really in charge. But both his fiance and Katharine Hepburn's character. He's not a dumb blonde, but he's a nice looking himbo, I guess, is one term I've heard, right? And the women are pretty much running the show, and they are in charge, and they're in control, and it's fun to see that. It's fun to see the role reversal that you get. And in screwball comedy, not just Katharine Hepburn, but over and over, we have women who don't need to be rescued. That's for sure, from the guy. Or from the monster, by the guy, I guess. Now, there's one term, and it goes by pretty fast. Now, first off, the whole movie's online, which is very cool, and I love the movie, and it's fantastic. You don't have to watch the whole movie. I've put some times down on the module, so you'll know. Normally, I would show maybe the first 20 or 25 minutes of the movie. That's pretty much the best stuff, and it sets everything up. You're welcome to jump around. You can watch the whole movie for your paper, whatever you want to do. But it's kind of cool that the whole thing is there on YouTube. And I would start watching from the very beginning. You can jump around a little bit, but the first third or so of the movie is quite fantastic. So there's this phrase that's going to happen, and Cary Grant's character is, Katharine Hepburn's character hasn't entered the film yet. And he's come down from his dinosaur, and the head of the department has said that there is a rich donor who, be nice to him, go golfing with him, and have drinks and everything, and his wife too, because he is thinking about donating $1 million to the university's science department, something like that. Again, this goes by really fast. And Cary Grant's character says, wow, $1 million, that's pretty white of him. Very fast. That's pretty white of him. Yeah. Okay. Being white people, generous. Yes, that's the implication. So you might hear that phrase sometimes in movies. I remember hearing it when I was a kid. I'm not that old, but I remember hearing it. That's pretty white of you. Okay, and that was a compliment. Okay, the white people, the white race, yes, generous, kind, off with their colonies, running things, showing the people of the world how the world needs to be run. Yeah, um, that's the way people thought back then. So it goes by really fast, and usually I have to stop the DVD that I'm showing and say, "Did you hear that?" And only one or two hands go up. But I like to call attention to that sort of thing. Um, it's uh, it's kind of weird, but it's out there, and that's what that means. Okay, off we go to Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. Not exactly screwball comedies, but a lot of comedies nevertheless, and I thought they would fit into this class quite nicely. They made 7 films together. They won 6 Oscars. That's pretty good. They're both well regarded as actors and actresses, and they were on and off-screen secret lovers. That's another part of the way Hollywood was back then. The idea possibly of getting divorced and things like that was not good for one's career. Some Hollywood people could get divorced. I mean, there was a little bit of that going on back then. But Spencer Tracy was a devout Catholic and didn't want to do that, get divorced or anything like that. So he and Katharine Hepburn had a very long, 30 or 40-year secret relationship. I guess it was sort of an open secret. I don't know what his wife thought about it, but it was a fairly open secret. And they made Spencer Tracy's last film together in 1967, and he died a couple of weeks after the film finished. It's called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, a very interesting film. So Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, and some of their films: Woman of the Year, Adam's Rib, Adam and Eve, right? Adam's Rib, Pat and Mike, and Desk Set. And sometimes they're married, and sometimes they have to fall in love to get married, but wonderful bunch of movies that they made together. Another team, same-sex team in this case, not of the gay variety, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, and there's Dorothy Lamour, and they made a series called The Road To. And they were always the road to exotic, faraway places like Zanzibar or Morocco or places like that. Hong Kong, I think, is one of them. And they did them all for Paramount. They did 7 of them over the years. They are very fast and witty and sometimes unscripted, although the word was that they both had radio programs, and so they both had a stable of writers that would write for them, write material for them, so that they would appear to be funny and witty and all of that. And so they would go to their personal writers and say, punch up the script. Here's the script for The Road to Morocco. Punch it up a little bit. Give me some lines that might seem unscripted, but in many instances, apparently they were written by their personal writers, so they could appear as ad-libs in the film. And they were fairly topical, so they're going to make jokes and things about movies of the day. Now, this is, 70 years later, so topical humor doesn't translate so well. It's something like Bringing Up Baby works quite well because it could take place almost any time. I noticed I'm not sure if it was Netflix or Amazon, but the first few seasons of Saturday Night Live are streaming. And some of that stuff is like 40 or 50 years ago. And I bet if you watched the first or second season of Saturday Night Live, it wouldn't seem very funny to you. And, I mean, John Belushi's fantastic, and Chevy Chase and all of that, but it's pretty topical humor. And they're going to be making jokes about Jimmy Carter, and they're going to be making jokes about President Gerald Ford. and it's very topical, and sometimes topical humor doesn't travel that well. And I would ask if you watch some of that stuff, how funny you think it is, because sometimes that kind of stuff doesn't travel in time quite so well. It's still funny for me, but I was there. And so Hope and Crosby, they play girl crazy, often con artists. It's kind of funny when you're in your 20s or 30s. When you get into your 40s and 50s, it seems a little weird and a little icky and so on. Not quite literally chasing pretty young women, but almost. And so again, this is a window into the way things were. Okay, so, before we judge too much, basically we're looking at history, and we're looking at history of 50, 60, 70 years ago, and it's a learning opportunity, really. Just, make note, and I don't like to write the whole thing off of anybody. I'm kind of open to that, and I say, well, that's the way things were. Thank goodness they changed, and I want to see the rest of the movie because it's funny. Some people might have trouble when they start making fun of things, of some of the stuff that they're going to make fun of, disabled and things like that. Yeah, sure, it's not politically correct, but it's pretty funny, and it's from 70 years ago, and so for me, I choose to make note and move on. And some people might say, maybe not for me. And that's okay too. That's okay too. Now, there's a song, just a kind of an aside here. There's a song, On the Road to Morocco. They're going to start singing We're Off on the Road to Morocco. Now, Bing Crosby was a huge recording star, one of the biggest ever. I mean, he's up there really with Frank Sinatra and Elvis and the Beatles. He was a big, big recording star. And he had radio program, and he made movies. He won the Oscar. Okay, so he really did it all. Now, we don't remember Bing Crosby quite that much these days. Maybe not the way some of these other people, but he was a big, big star. Bob Hope, not quite as big a star, but a pretty big star. Bob kind of found his, he was a stand-up comedian first off, and that was kind of a new thing. Today, they're all over the place. All the talk shows, the late night shows, all the stand-up comedians, Jerry Seinfeld, all of that. But Bob was one of the very, very first, if not the first stand-up comedian who would stand up there, introduce people, MC a show, and tell topical jokes. Okay, that he was maybe the very first. And that's kind of interesting. And so when war broke out and our troops were going to training camps and then off overseas, Bob decided that he would do his patriotic duty and he would entertain the troops. So first he would go to the training camps in Texas and places like that around the country. And then when the troops were shipped overseas, Bob took a show over, USO, United Services Organizations, I think it is, and he would take some pretty girls like Dorothy Lamour, and take some singers, take a band, and he'd tell jokes and entertain the troops. And he did it through World War II, sometimes getting quite close to the front, where stray rockets and things like that could come down. I mean, he didn't just stay in England during the whole war. They traveled over to France and through Germany, and were actually pretty close to the front. And he did it again during the Korean War. He took Marilyn Monroe and some other people over to Korea and performed near the front. And then, even in the 1960s, he went over to Vietnam and performed during the Vietnam War, again with the new stars, right? The new hot young whoever of the 1960s, and he would tell his jokes, and the soldiers loved him because he'd tell jokes about the brass, the generals and people like that, and very popular, and kind of an interesting career doing that. So that's Bob Hope and Bing Crosby kind of their off-the-road careers. And Bob made it to 100. He died not that long ago, but he made it to 100, and Bing not quite so long. Okay, so kind of an overview of humor from the late 30s and into the 1940s, and screwball comedy and all that. Tons of fun. I hope you enjoy that stuff. Watch as many of the links as you can. The entire Road to Morocco, the whole movie's there. So, of course, you don't have to watch the whole movie. You can watch bits and pieces. The beginning part's pretty funny. But you can jump around, just, hop around, see what you like. It's kind of amazing that the whole movie's right there, and you can watch what you want. And so you can enjoy that, and you could, extra credit or a regular paper on this is the Road to Rio, which is the full movie. Normally I show some stuff from the Road to Morocco, but the Road to Rio is pretty good. It's made in 1947. And the whole thing's there, so you can jump around and see what people thought was funny back then. So that does it for us today. And thank you so much for joining me. We have another one of my favorite classes or subjects coming up. I love these classes where I get to do a whole class on musicals or gangsters or screwball comedy or horror. And our very last one of those is coming up for our next class with film noir and Humphrey Bogart and Casablanca and some wonderful stuff. So I will be back with our new topic very shortly. Thank you for joining me.